Come alive, you're in the Pepsi generation. Come alive, you're in the Pepsi generation.
Hello, everyone. Come alive, come alive. You're in the Pepsi generation, the official drink of Empower You Pepsi. Hey, welcome to Empower You, everyone. I'm Dan Reganold. And these classes, which we started 11 years ago now, their one goal is to help educate, enjoy, and engage, and help get you more empowered in your lives. And tonight, we've got a great session. We're going to talk about important topics like this crazy woke culture we're living in and what we need to do to improve our elections and watch out over our elections. So we're looking forward to our great speakers tonight. And I just had a few things I wanted to go over before we start the class. What a semester it was. It was really one of our best ever. It's really kind of taken its toll on me. We had so many good classes and our attendance, thank you, has just been amazing. It's been an honor to have this opportunity to learn with you this semester. And we of course look forward to the fall when we'll regroup. A chuckle from our friend Bill at the Cheviot Gazette. So many people who have to hire employees right now. It's just such a hard time because of, quite frankly, the great unemployment package that you, and I do say you, are giving away to the public. You know, employers are trying all sorts of things. For instance, here's an example that Bill sent me of what the city of Cincinnati is trying to do. Here's what it says. The city of Cincinnati is looking to improve our team with enthusiastic employees who display a natural ability to evade from the police. They work well with gangs, 5 or more members preferable, and 3 that embody the phrase snitches got snitches, apply today. Thanks, Bill, for that, that fun reminder. I wanted to introduce you to our virtual team. They're back. It's been great seeing them at Empower You Studio. Betty Overstreet, our great executive director, Jill Google, our operations manager, Bill Roll, our treasurer, our producer on the board tonight, Jay Grunke. Also our important board members, Joe Platt, Ken Bowman, Karen Cartier, Bill Monier, Nita Thomas, who was instrumental in helping arrange tonight's class, and Barb Horwitz. You know, we've been thrilled to be back at Empower You Studio for 7 classes at partial capacity, and it's great to see so many friends. We can't wait to open up September 23rd of this year for our 22nd semester. So we've got some big news for you. Look for a new name in the fall. Same free classes, but a new name. EmpowerYouOhio.org becomes EmpowerYouAmerica.org. Come join us in the fall to educate, enjoy, and engage. We can't wait. Most of you know we're a free university, and tonight we want to just do a virtual pass the hat if we can. The easiest way to donate a couple bucks is when you're signing up for classes or on our website the night on the right-hand side of EmpowerYouOhio.org, or when you're signing up for a class. You know, so many of you have donated this year, and I got to tell you, we just really, really appreciate it. So as always, we have a little required reading. This was actually a bright spot in the required reading. This article appeared in the Daily Wire today. GOP sweeps in Texas election as the city revolts against Biden-backed critical race theory. It's great to finally see a positive sign. It's an important article. If you want to read it, you can go on EmpowerYouOhio.org, and there's a link to the article under tonight's class. So tonight's giveaway is what I'm calling a real triple header. 2 copies of Vivek Ramaswamy's book, Woke Inc. will be given away, and 1 pack of the official drink of Empower You. And you know what it is, Diet Pepsi. You know, come alive, come alive. So to get a chance to win, 3 chances to win, just go to the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and this is where you'll ask questions tonight to our guests, Vivek and Ken Blackwell, and you'll have 3 big chances to win. All you'll need to do is enter your email address under the Q&A section, and you'll have a chance to win. It's going to be a great book when it comes out in the summer. There's a ton of people online tonight. We're just really glad to have you here. So Many of you, I think, know that tonight was supposed to be the last class of the semester, but we've decided to add one last class a week from tonight, May 11th. Many of us have been doing a deep dive on critical race theory in Ohio, and this will be our chance to share important information with you about that subject. On Tuesday night of next week, we'll hear from a parent, Karen Molfetta from Lakota, and we'll hear from Kirsten Hill, a state board member, plus others. I had one of the handouts that Karen received that she saw her 14-year-old son get from the school. It was shocking. I was going to show it to you, and I just felt like I needed to hold off another week and let her tell you about it. But it's going to be a great class. We've got a bunch of people that are going to be with us that night, and I really think I hope you'll sign up. That night, we're going to hear from investigative journalist Jack Windsor. My friend Tom Hagedorn is going to open the session with a short discussion on the relationship between critical race theory and Marxism. It's a little confusing, and we want to help you understand it better. You'll also hear from history teacher in Northern Ohio educator Mark Razinski. He's going to talk about the importance of teaching history to our kids correctly. This is a session you need to invite your friends. Empower U's mission regarding critical race theory is to let you know it's in Ohio and to help get you prepared for how you can fight back to your school boards and everyone else. We've asked Governor DeWine to make a statement at the class. I hope he'll take us up for it. I think he needs to. We'll see. So Tuesday's class last week was incredible. 104-year-old Bob Doolin and Ray Hughes joined us for a discussion of the Great Escape. It was such a fun night of history. If you want to rewatch that class, these are two real patriots. Tonight's class will be filmed. To rewatch the class, Ken Blackwell is part of the class. Just wait 24 hours. You can go to the class on empoweruohio.org. You can look for the link for the recording and click the link and watch it and share it with your friends. So let's move on to tonight. We've got a lot to go over. So Vivek Ramaswamy founded Ravant Sciences, a pharmaceutical company, in 2014 after a career as a successful biotech investor. A 35-year-old first-generation American, he's a graduate of Harvard College and Yale Law School. Vivek became a hedge fund partner in his 20s and grew up the child of immigrants in the small town of Evendale, Ohio. He now lives with his wife, Apurva, and their son, Karthik. Mr. Ramaswamy serves on the board of the directors of the Philanthropy Roundtable and the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. In his new book, Woke Inc., Vivek takes you behind the scenes of the corporate boardrooms and five-star conferences into Ivy League classrooms and secret nonprofits. The book begins as a critique of stakeholder capitalism and ends with an exploration of what it means to be an American in 2021. Vivek is a graduate of St. X High School, and you've seen him recently probably on Tucker Carlson's show, which has been fun to watch, and on the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal. So Vivek Ramaswamy, welcome to Empower You. It's great to have you here. And Vivek, so I wanted to mention Vivek and I kind of go way back to the days of the tennis courts in Evendale. Now, Vivek, the way I remember it was you and your brother Shankar, and you were playing my daughter Kelly and me. And the way I remember it, you guys kind of took us to task. Is that how you remember it?
I don't necessarily remember it that way. I think that you were kind of the older guy that would hit it really hard and just, make sure we were dodging the bullets. So that's
the older guy. That's what I'm known for. It was such a great. Those were such great days in Evendale, and I want to thank our friend, our family friend Mick, for helping arrange this. And I know you've got some prepared comments you want to make, but before you start that. Growing up in a small town like Evendale, how has that changed your kind of view of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's everyone's the product of their upbringing. And for me, I'm very different from a lot of my peers in the corporate world, even a lot of the peers that I went to school with in college or in law school, from having come from Evendale, right? I mean, we grew up with neighbors. You were on Sherbrooke, we were on Kingsport growing up. Both of our neighbors on one side was a French immigrant family, on the other side was a black family. It didn't matter, we're an Indian immigrant family, but we all saw each other as fellow members of the same community, playing tennis at the same Evendale Rec Center on the same basketball teams. Kelly and I sat next to each other. Kelly's Dan's daughter used to sit next to each other in first grade at school, and we saw each other as just part of the same community, irrespective of where any of us had come from. And I think that really shaped my background in a way that made me grateful for a lot of the successes that I've been fortunate to enjoy since then. It was never something that was preordained, but something that I was only ever going to realize through hard work and actually making that happen. And so I'm grateful for that upbringing. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, we're just so glad to have you. Talk to us about what you've been doing. Fill us in.
Yeah, taking me back to my days when Kelly and I were at Evendale Elementary. I think it was 1992. I was in second grade, and it was the first time that I heard Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. I've heard it many times since then, but even when I heard it for the first time as an American, it was almost like I already knew it. Where the thing that he called on us to do was to be judged and to judge one another, not on the color of our skin, but on the content of our character. And there's something about that moment, I remember it in second grade, that stuck with me ever since, because it was really personal for me. It was the dream that allowed my dad, who, not with white skin, with a thick Indian accent, come to this country in the 1970s, build a career at GE in Evendale, and to really realize his dreams and have two kids who eventually went to Harvard, and one of whom was gone to start a company that's become successful. That is the American dream. And so to me, it was always second nature. And over the years, over the last few decades, I personally began to almost take it for granted. And today, when I watch what's happening in our country, I don't take it for granted anymore. I think that is a dream that we have woken up from and that we need to revive once more. And so though my company went on to develop drugs for a wide range of diseases, one of them is a drug for prostate cancer, I actually stepped down from my role as CEO of the company in January of this year so that I could tackle a different cancer. It's not a biological cancer, but a cultural cancer, a cancer that goes to the heart of our country's identity. And because of the nature of the world we live in, as a CEO of a company, I actually wasn't even free to really speak about it with honesty and with the real latitude that I think we're going to need to in order to address that virus. And to me, that virus is what we call woke culture. It posits that your identity is your race, your gender, and your sexual orientation, full stop. It's a new religion. It's a secular religion, but a religion nonetheless, that has completely infected our institutions in America. It says that if you're Black, you're inherently disempowered. If you're white, you're inherently privileged. And it doesn't matter where you came from. America is a systemically racist country, full stop. Ayanna Pressley, she's a congresswoman. She summed it up about as well as anybody could last year when she said that actually we don't even want any more Black faces that don't want to be Black voices. We don't want any more brown faces that don't want to be brown voices. I'm going to guess that I don't fit her description of what counts as a brown voice. But the main message was that you and your ideas and your thoughts are now a prisoner of the color of your skin. Exactly the opposite of what Martin Luther King taught us 6 decades ago. So that's this new virus of woke culture. But there's a particularly clever part about how this particular infection spreads. And the way it works is if you happen to disagree with any of those claims, it actually means you're just racist and you don't know it. If you say that all lives matter, somehow that means that you believe that Black lives don't matter. If you say that you're not a racist, actually that means that you are racist. If you capitalize the W in white, or do something as silly as fail to capitalize the B in Black, it also means you're racist. And there's really no greater damnation in modern America today than to be called a racist. So when given the choice between being tarred with this scarlet R and pledging allegiance to this new religion, everyday Americans are now choosing to bend the knee. And I personally think that this is a threat to the existence of America itself. It's created a new culture of fear in this country, fear of losing your job, fear of failing a class in school, fear of becoming a pariah in your own community. And that culture of fear has completely replaced our free speech culture in America. And I think a good measure of the health of any democracy, especially American democracy, is the percent of people who actually feel free to say what they actually believe in public. And right now we are doing abysmally on that metric. According to the Cato Institute, over 60%, 60% of Americans today say they are afraid of saying what they believe in public because of the current political environment. And when I think about it, that is not the country that my parents came halfway across the world to join 40 years ago. It is not the country that I learned to pledge allegiance to when I was at Evendale Elementary. It is not the country that I want to see America become. And yet we have this new red guard in America. It's like the Chinese Communist Cultural Revolution. This new red guard, instead of pushing Marxism, they're not pushing this new philosophy of wokeism, but it has created a new contorted culture where in the name of diversity, we've sacrificed actual true diversity of thought. In the name of democracy, we've actually sacrificed our most important democratic ideals of free speech and open debate. In the name of inclusion, we've created this new exclusionary political culture. And that's where we are today. And so one of the things I do in my upcoming book is I talk a little bit about how did we get here? And it used to be that this philosophy of wokeism was about challenging the system. But today, this new philosophy of wokeism is the system. It controls our major companies. It controls our institutions. All of our universities and nonprofit institutions pledge allegiance to it. And I ask the question, how the heck did we get here? And I actually traced the origin. I'm happy to talk about this more in the Q&A, but I traced the origin of the supercharged version of wokeism back to the 2008 financial crisis, where if you remember the 2008 financial crisis, right after that, corporations were actually the bad guy. The left hated corporations and said that corporate power was a bad thing and that we actually needed to redistribute money from people who had made money through corporate power and give it to poor people. Agree or not, that's what the old left had to say. But after the 2008 financial crisis, something interesting happened where corporations didn't have to be the bad guys if they adopted these new woke values. And if you're a big bank in 2008, occupy Wall Street, now that's a pretty tough pill to swallow because it actually threatens your market power. But adopting these woke values, that was actually pretty easy. All you had to do was applaud diversity and inclusion. You had to put the right people with the right skin color or the right gender on your corporate board. You maybe had to create an affinity group for analysts of color at your bank, and you're pretty good to go. Continue to last year, Goldman Sachs, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, one of the most prestigious investment banks, says last year from the mountaintops of Davos, of course, that Goldman Sachs will not take company public in the United States unless its board is sufficiently diverse, where of course, Goldman Sachs is the sole arbiter of who counts as diverse. And that was the way that corporations didn't have to be the bad guys as the source of corporate power. They could actually be the good guys if they brought their corporate power to bear on the right causes. And so in a nutshell, after 2008, that's what happened, where a bunch of big banks got in bed with a bunch of woke millennials. Together, they birthed this new trend of woke capitalism. And of course, they put Occupy Wall Street up for adoption. That's the trend we've seen in big business over the course of the last 10 years. The same things happen on the other coast in Silicon Valley, where there's a backroom deal, an unspoken backroom deal, where it goes like this. If you're a social media company or an internet company, today you agree to censor content that woke activists disagree with. But in return, your expectation is you go to those woke activists and you tell them to leave your monopoly power intact and to co-opt the Democratic Party into doing the same thing. And just like the banks, it's working masterfully for both sides. So that's how this new arranged marriage works. And I use the analogy of an arranged marriage because my parents had an arranged marriage in India. It's one that worked. It's one that worked because neither side was getting something out of the trade. But this is a new unholy alliance. It's a different kind of arranged marriage where each side gets something out of this bargain. It's more like mutual prostitution. And it's led to the birth of what I think of as America's newest monster, the emergence of this new woke industrial complex. Liberals are tricked into loving it because of their love of woke causes. And meanwhile, conservatives, even conservatives like me, like those who, like a version of myself 10 years ago, would have said that actually the free market can do no wrong. So aren't these private companies just acting in the way that private companies do? And in that way, both sides are duped into submission. And we have the rise of a new, nefarious, more powerful 21st century monster that is exercising far more control than any demon in the course of American history. And it's even worse than that, because it's not just an unholy alliance of two. In the last few years, there's actually a new guest on the scene that's turned this unholy alliance, if I may say, into a threesome. That is the Communist Party of China. Now, I'll tell you this, they understand this game of wokeism far more deeply than any of us do. There's actually even a Chinese word for wokeness called baizuo. It literally refers to white woke people in the United States, and they use it to make fun of us. And they use it to make fun of us because they are actually using wokeism now as a geopolitical tool to undermine the United States from within. And if you have any doubt about that, just look at what Xi Jinping said last year when European Union leaders challenged him on the Uyghur human rights crisis, where, by the way, they have locked up over 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps in the Xinjiang province, who, by the way, Apple uses as slave labor to make their iPhones. I bet they don't tell you that. And Xi Jinping's first response when the EU challenges them on this is that Black Lives Matter shows that the United States is no better. Their top diplomat, Yang Jiechi, comes to the Alaska summit just a month ago. And in his opening speech, lectures us on how the United States is slaughtering, that's his word, slaughtering Black Americans, and that he hopes, from China's standpoint, that the United States does better on human rights. That would be laughable if it didn't have such serious consequences. So how are they getting away with this? The answer actually comes back to woke corporations. Take Disney. In 2018, you might remember this, Disney said they could not shoot a film in Georgia if Georgia passed a new anti-abortion statute. Yet just last year, Disney goes to the Xinjiang province to shoot Mulan, the Xinjiang province, ground zero, the epicenter of the Uyghur human rights crisis. And not only do they shoot the film Mulan there, they also go so far as to publicly thank the CCP and the Xinjiang province and the local authorities for even allowing them the privilege of filming there. That's Disney. The NBA is even worse, right? The NBA is regularly decrying racial injustice and applauding Black Lives Matter by printing its name on its court in last year's playoffs. Yet the NBA continues to expand into the Chinese market without a peep. And actually, a couple of years ago, when Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, tweeted, "Stand for freedom, stand with Hong Kong. Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." That's exactly what he tweeted. LeBron James, one of the most outspoken critics of the 45th president of the United States, one of the most outspoken supporters of Black Lives Matter, actually came to China's public defense and denounced Daryl Morey for tweeting in favor of Hong Kong. That is how this new game works with these woke corporations and their crony celebrities. And you might ask yourself, why are they doing it? And the answer is really simple. It comes down to one thing, it comes down to money. Because it turns out that the CCP has actually built a Chinese wall that prevents companies from entering the Chinese market if you criticize the CCP. But they open the door to that Chinese wall if you actually criticize the United States. It's as simple as that. That is how the game works. And now they're using that same tool. It's worked so well for them that they've learned from their lessons. Do more of it. They're using the same thing to now deflect accountability for COVID-19 as well. Just think about the name of this virus. The Marburg virus is named after a town in Germany where that virus originated. The Ebola virus is named after a river in Africa where it originated. The Zika virus is named after the forest where it originated. The Japanese encephalitis virus is named after, well, Japan, where it originated. Even with COVID-19, you can say the UK strain. You could say the South African strain. You could say the Brazilian strain. You can say the Indian double mutant strain. But if you say the Wuhan virus, you are immediately bashed as a racist and a bigot. Ask yourself why. The CCP has co-opted wokeism as a geopolitical weapon to undermine the United States by using the threat of racism to deflect accountability for COVID-19. That is how this game works. And that, in my opinion, actually, that is the real Chinese virus, I would say, that we need to fight, is actually not this woke virus, not this COVID-19 virus, but the woke virus that has turned into this new cultural pandemic. They're using it to equate Chinese nihilism with American idealism. And when that happens, Chinese nihilism wins every time. So the winners of this game are clear. Corporations, woke activists, and the Chinese Communist Party. But the real losers of this game are American democracy and the American people as we know it. Now, you might ask yourself, what are the solutions to this? And I think we can go there a little bit in the Q&A because I do want to leave a good amount of time for Q&A. But as I think about the framework for solutions, I think about what it even means to be not just a conservative, but an American in the modern day. And I speak as a conservative, but this isn't a conservative or a liberal issue. This is an American issue. In 1980, one of my personal heroes, Ronald Reagan, correctly identified that the biggest threat to liberty and prosperity in the United States was big government. And he was right at the time. Slash government regulations, slash taxes, those were his solutions. He was right at the time. But that is not the main challenge of 2021. Today, that's only half the problem. It's not just big government, it is this new hybrid of big government and big business working together, this new woke industrial complex. That is the real threat to everyday liberty and prosperity of ordinary Americans today. And so we don't need the solutions of 1980 to apply them to 2021. We need new solutions in 2021 that meet the unique challenges of our moment. I'm reminded of what one of the great Republicans, Abraham Lincoln, said 160 years ago. The dogmas of a quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. We need solutions that meet today with the problems of today. So to me, the beginning of those solutions actually start with changing some laws. The basic changes I would make to the legal code are simple. They're changes that effectively point out hypocrisy by saying you can't have it both ways. Let me give you one example. With big tech censorship. What we're seeing with big tech censorship in this country is not actually what private companies are doing as private companies, because the conventional wisdom goes that these are just social media companies. They're technology companies in Silicon Valley. They're free to decide what content does and doesn't show up on their site. And on the face of it, that sounds like pretty appealing logic. But if you scratch beneath the surface, you actually see what's really going on here. What's really going on is crony capitalism in reverse, where Congress calls these companies once a quarter, a few times per year, over the course of the last year, especially after the Democrats took control of the House. And they say, we want you to take down hate speech or misinformation, by the way, as we define it. And if you don't do it, we're going to come after you. We're going to punish you. We're going to break you up. We're going to regulate the heck out of you. Well, guess what these companies do? They go out and censor exactly the content that their new leftist overlords didn't want them to allow on their websites. And they go even further than that. Congress has actually passed Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which immunizes. It's a federal law that provides a special form of immunity only to internet companies to be able to say that actually, if you censor content that you otherwise would have taken down, you can't even be sued in state court for it. That's what this federal law says if you're an internet company. So I'll give you an example. Imagine if people in Congress wanted to get around the constitutional prohibition under Roe v. Wade on preventing abortions. Here's the easy way to do it, is you could say that actually we're going to pass a law that says that we're not banning abortions. We're just giving a special form of immunity to people who set up barricades outside abortion clinics and say they can't be sued for trespassing. And by the way, we're going to, as a Republican Congress, call abortion activists in front of us and say that if you don't actually go in and barricade those clinics for pro-life activists, we're actually going to come after you. That's exactly what they're doing in Silicon Valley by saying that actually you get a special form of immunity if you go censor content that we don't like. And by the way, you better go do it or else we're going to come after you. That is not capitalism. That is not the free market. It is a reverse form of crony capitalism. And my view is that Congress cannot delegate its dirty work to private companies. It cannot have private companies as its pawns doing what it directly cannot do under the Constitution. So the simple fix is make something like Section 230 an opt-in statute that tells these companies you can't have it both ways. Either you get to operate as a private company, or you get a special form of federal protection that other companies don't get. But if you get that form of federal protection, then you're bound by the same constraints as the federal government itself, including the Constitution and especially the First Amendment. So that's one example, right? It would address big tech censorship. It would address this social media scourge that we're seeing today. Different example. Companies are firing employees who defect from their orthodoxy. If you say the wrong thing at work, if you express your beliefs at home, you're at risk of being fired today. It's happening every day across the country. And unfortunately, everyday Americans today have to make that choice between living the American dream, putting food on the dinner table, and being able to express themselves at home. And in my opinion, America is not a country that makes you choose between the American dream and the First Amendment. You get to have both. And yet that's the state of affairs we live in today. My answer here again is that you can't have it both ways when it comes to protected categories. The Civil Rights Act said that we create these protected categories: race, gender, sex, now including sexual orientation after Bostock last year, religion. These are certain protected categories that businesses cannot legally engage in discrimination on the basis of. Well, it's my view that if you can't discriminate on race or sex or religion, then you should not be able to discriminate on the basis of political belief either. If you can't fire someone just because they're Black or gay or Muslim, then you should not be able to fire them just because they're an outspoken conservative either. Now, the libertarian side of my brain, again, crops up again, version of myself from 10 years ago, and says that actually, shouldn't the market solve this problem on its own, where private businesses could simply hire up those conservatives that are being fired, and wouldn't that create an opportunity for somebody else? But here's the problem with that argument, is that nobody is calling for repealing the prohibitions on discrimination on sex or race or religion. In fact, that's something that every, not only liberal, but even every conservative or every libertarian would refuse to touch. And my own view is so long as we have those restrictions, then it's ultimately wrong to simply trust the market in the case of political discrimination, but not trust the market to police other forms of discrimination as well. Again, coming back to the idea that you can't have it both ways. So if I go through more of those in the book, I'm not going to talk about those at greater depth here, Dan, but in closing, I'd love to just share the idea that the dream expressed by Martin Luther King 30 years ago, 60 years ago, the American dream as we know it today, that no matter who you are or where your parents came from, you can achieve anything you ever want to. That's a dream that we woke up from. That is what the essence of woke culture is all about. And the problem with the dream is once you wake up from it, you forget what it was all about. Well, I think we're in that phase of beginning to forget what that dream was about. And part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because I care about reviving that American dream. So,
and under critical race theory, we're told we should just throw out the words of Martin Luther King to the side of the road and just forget about him like it never happened.
Absolutely, we are. Yeah,
so,
and I'm seeing it every day.
So I'm just kind of curious about your the evolution of your thought, Vivek. You went to Harvard, you went to Yale. Did you feel like coming out of there you were indoctrinated, or were you able to survive through it?
Well, look, I graduated from Harvard in 2007. I graduated from Yale Law School in 2013. I will say that both of those schools are fundamentally different even today than they were a decade ago. A lot has changed over the course of the last decade. Now, was I in the minority with respect to my perspectives back when I was in college? Sure, I was. I actually think I got a better education because of it, but it was still an environment where people could challenge one another, be challenged. And if you're on the side that's in the minority, you actually are challenged more and you benefit and you learn more as a consequence. That's a healthy environment. And by the way, many of the views that I have today weren't necessarily my views back then. It actually was the product of challenging your peers and being challenged by them that causes you to think about issues in different ways. But today we've taken this hard left turn against intellectual freedom. And I think I'm a little worried about what that's going to mean for the next generation of graduates from not only these schools, but schools across the country as well.
So one question from a listener, and please ask your questions down at the bottom of the screen under Q&A if you have them for Vivek. Paul says, "Hey, let's give a plug for St. X, Vivek."
Yeah, no, exactly. I was gonna get there, but I clearly was biased towards my days with Dan's daughter Kelly was my classmate in Princeton schools. But yeah, I went to St. X for high school, and my parents actually, I can tell you the story of why we switched. But went to St. X, I graduated in 03.
Tom has a question. How do you feel about boycotts as a weapon to fight back? Buy local, avoid big box, don't buy from the woke corpse. How do you feel about that?
Great question. So I'm conflicted about it is the answer. And I'll tell you why I'm sympathetic to it. Because at the end of the day, if you have to fight back, you have to use the toolkit that's available to you. But at the end of the day, I don't like the consequences of boycotts on either side. Because for me, the principle is this. In our democracy, in American democracy, we work out our differences with one another in the open, through free speech, through open debate, and through dialogue. The marketplace is supposed to be a marketplace for products where we buy things, where we use money to buy things. And I think that the market works according to a $1, one vote system. We can vote up which design of this bottle of water we want, or which design of a can of Pepsi we want. That's how the market votes, and I'm okay with that. But I don't love a world in which we use that $1, one vote principle and apply it to our moral norms, which ought to be sorted out through open debate rather than through the use of force. And so, though it is tempting, the analogy that I would use is when fighting terrorism on the global stage after 2001, we did not use the same methods as our terrorists, even as the terrorists we were fighting, even though that was inconvenient in the short run. But in the long run, that's part of what defines who we are. And I think the same goes for this new form of intellectual terrorism that we're fighting too, is that it's tempting to fight fire with fire. But at the end of the day, we may not even have a nation left in the end. If we have two economies, two versions of baseball, two versions of basketball, we've completely ruined these apolitical spheres that otherwise would have brought us together. I didn't know whether my political views differed from Dan or not when we used to play tennis at the Evendale Rec Center. And that's a good thing. And I think going into the world in which we have a Republican tennis court and a Democratic tennis court isn't the version of America that I actually want to live in. And so though it is tempting, and though I am sympathetic to conservatives who are taking up these politically motivated consumer boycotts in return as a defense mechanism, I think we have to come together as a people and culturally find a way forward that lifts us out of this race to the bottom.
So all the people that are really upset by all the things that are going on, how would you what would you tell them to do to fight back?
Yeah. So I think that there's a few things. One is that when you find yourself in a room, be it a school board, be it a parent-teacher conference, be it a diversity training at work, be it a corporate meeting, where you believe you're the only person in the room who has an opinion, you really have to stand up, and you have an obligation not just to yourself, but at this moment we live in, to your country, to stand up and actually express what you believe, even if you think that involves some amount of personal risk in doing so. And if you commit to doing that, I'll make a commitment to you in return. I'm willing to wager this, that if you do it, you will discover that you are almost certainly not the only person in that room who actually holds that opinion. And you will give courage to somebody else to do the same thing. And maybe they think something similar to you. Maybe they thought something different, but they were afraid to say it too. That's
we watched the Jordan Peterson movie last week, Thursday, in our Empower You studio, Vivek, and there's a lot to be said for his speaking out on everything. A couple final questions. Are you endorsing a candidate for Senator Portman's position? That's from Dave.
I haven't yet. No, I haven't. I'm watching it, and I think it's a really important seat. But I think it's important to have somebody who not only has the right ideas, but also the capabilities to see them through, which is something that where a lot of Republicans have fallen disappointingly short.
So it's obvious to me, Vivek, I've watched you. When your editorial from the Wall Street Journal came out, I made it required reading for an Empower You class. And I can tell you want to make an influence on America. And what's the best way for you to do that? How are you going to do that moving forward? What do you hope to do? Yeah,
look, I have lived a phase of my life where I was fortunate to enjoy success in the business world at a relatively young age. I have lived, the reason the American dream is so important to me is it's not just something we learned in second grade. It is something that I have lived. And I think the next stage of my life is going to be about keeping that dream alive for the next generation. So the first way I began doing that is actually by writing this book. I hope this book marks the beginning of the end of both the woke movement and the woke capitalist movement in one fell swoop. And I personally think this new woke industrial complex is the singular threat to the everyday liberty and prosperity of Americans. So I'm trying to do it through intellectual leadership. But one of the things that I'm discovering is that is just the starting point. And I would like to see a broader new movement across our country that revives our shared understanding of who we are as a people, where we have spent the last decade celebrating our diversity and our differences, that we've really forgotten all of the ways in which we are actually the same, irrespective of how we look. And so I'm giving thought to what that movement looks like.
As Abraham Lincoln said, we are one. And that's easy to be forgotten. So Vivek, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to visit Empower You. We're looking forward to the release of Woke Inc. And the winners tonight of the book are Martha R., Kathleen B., and of course, don't forget Melanie, who gets the 12 pack of Diet Pepsi, which is our official drink. Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you for coming to Empower You. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Good night. So, wow, what a powerful interview from someone you're all going to be seeing a lot from in the future. And I think that's a very good thing. Ken Blackwell, we are so glad to have Ken with us tonight. And Ken is a senior fellow for human rights and constitutional government at the Family Research Council. He's a national best-selling author of 3 books. He serves on the board of directors at many different companies. His political career is nothing short of extraordinary. He was mayor of Cincinnati in 1978 when I moved here, and what a great city it was. He was treasurer from 1994 to 1999, secretary of state for 8 years, 1999 to 2007, undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and U.S. ambassador to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. He's received many awards, probably the most prestigious, the John M. Ashbrook Award for steadfast conservative leadership. You can read his commentaries in major newspapers and websites. Ken, I'd love to see if we could switch you out with Eugene Robinson in the Cincinnati Enquirer. Maybe we could just kind of make that happen. He holds many honorary degrees and a Bachelor of Science and Master of Education degrees from Xavier University. It was at our class, kind of an incredible class we had last semester at the end of the year on the First Amendment. I think we had 14 people talk about it. When Ken broke the news to us that he was traveling around Pennsylvania, looking at what happened to the election, and he told us he would have much to tell. We asked him to come back, and he was so kind to do it. So Ken Blackwell, welcome to Empower You. We're glad to have you.
Hey, Dan, it's good to be with you. And let me just tell you, what a treat. Vivek's presentation was inspirational, but it also set a starting point for me. And I will make sure that I lace election integrity, critical race theory, wokeism, and the present crisis that our constitutional republic is facing within its 245th year. Look, Aristotle said it best when he said that there was a dynamic tension between the organized power of the state and individual liberty. The more muscular and the more concentrated power in the state, the more threatening that was to individual liberty. And so the framers of our Constitution, they got it right. They said, we're going to put a harness on the power and reach of government. We're going to decentralize governmental power, not centralize it, to break it up, to compartmentalize it, so that it does not become a threat to individual liberty. In the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, they sort of gave the philosophical thread that runs through our 245 years this year of a constitutional republic that is robust, is diverse, and is the wealthiest in all of human history. What they said was our inalienable rights are not grants from government, they're gifts from God. You know, my dad used to say that phrase that, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident was a highfalutin way of saying any knucklehead should be able to get this. Governments can only protect our fundamental rights that are gifts from God. So what we now have is a threat to our constitutional republic and the harness that we've placed on government. That harness has loosened over the decades, but now there is a movement to just snap that harness and unleash highly centralized power in government and in federal government. And that is taken on many forms, not the least being the threat to the integrity of our electoral system in the United States of America, a system that is in keeping with the protection against the threat of highly centralized government. What we see now in proposed legislation in HR 1 and Senate 1 is an effort to centralize or federalize our elections, take it out of the hands of state legislatures and county governments in terms of its administration, and place it in the hands of a federal government that would, in fact, if they had their way, be under the guidance of a single party. That is the road that we find ourselves on as we debate this legislation. There is a laboratory that is being tapped, and that laboratory is the past election. And I thought that I would share with you a couple of things that made me and others say, huh, at the end of the 2020 elections. Let me give you a couple of things. Every president who gained votes in a re-election campaign has also won re-election for the past 100 years. Trump gained 11 million more votes in 2020 than he had registered in 2016. And somehow Biden pulled off a miracle. Biden shattered the popular vote record, but mysteriously won a record low of 17% of the counties. Biden is Biden is the president, the first president in 60 years to lose Ohio and Florida on his way to election. Biden became the second president in 168 years to lose Ohio, Florida, and Iowa. Trump won 18 of 19 bellwether counties, which have a near perfect record over the past 40 or 50 years. Those are some of the things that made many of us who are election observers, former election administrators, say, it just didn't meet the smell test. The pattern of irregularities, the patterns of unconstitutional actions by political bosses like in Pennsylvania made us say, this is not right. And we, in fact, must review the action, because my grandmother used to say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And the American people are basically saying, we want to get to the bottom of what went down in the 2020 election. What's happening now is that there's a tremendous effort to gaslight the public, to make us appear to be conspiracy theorists, because we're asking fundamentally sound questions about the policies and practice of the past election. You know, whether it's in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, the entire state, where in selected counties, election officials were allowed to cure ballots, which is a new way of saying fix ballots that were erroneously executed. Did they do that for all voters? No. They did it in counties that were highly Democratic, and they did it in precincts that were in fact Democrat laden. So, you know, that's an action. You know, we were told that there were irregularities in that there was a sliding end time for election day in Pennsylvania. So that there were ballots that should not have been counted because they were registered after the official deadline. Those were set aside, but the Supreme Court never picked them up, using the notion or the argument that the election was over, it was decided, and it would not, in fact, serve any purpose to go back and reopen that wound. Well, let me just say to you that going back to the model of our constitutional republic, elections using a principle that many of us learned in philosophy class at Xavier or elsewhere, of subsidiarity. That is, the lowest level of government is normally the best level of government to execute a policy or practice. In electoral, in election administration, that is the precinct level, that is the county, or the ward level, that is the county level. One of the things in S1 or HR1 in the federalization of elections would be to do away with the safeguard of verification practices, most notably voter ID. That has become a flashpoint for political debate and clashes all over the country. It became a reason for Major League Baseball to decide to take an all-star game scheduled for this July out of Atlanta because of their dissatisfaction with the election reforms in Georgia, and sent it to Colorado, where in fact they have they also have voter ID. But it was just amazing to me. I asked a couple of baseball officials, if I was to leave a set of tickets for you at will call, how do you get those tickets? You have to show a form of ID to prove that you are who you say you are. To take out a library book, the same deal. To get on an airplane, Delta ought to be ashamed of itself. There's not a person that can get on the airplane without showing a photo ID. But for somehow, this basic, proper, smart, free way of verifying that a voter is who he or she claims to be was somehow made to be racist, and therefore a reason to move an all-star game from a city that was 53% Black with a whole host of entrepreneurs that would have benefited from the $100 million associated with the all-star game, and move it to a city that is about 9–10% Black. Be that as it may, you know, Vivek's comments were so right on. We are diverse, but the old notion of e pluribus unum, from the many one, is based on a recognition that we are all invested with human dignity by a higher source, not by any government, but by God. The most basic level of governance in our society is the family. Those folks who want to move us on a path of an expanded welfare state, a government-centric culture and system, are determined to destroy the family in order to build dependence on the government. It is a prescription that is followed out in countries that are totalitarian, authoritarian, or statist in nation. And so you can't, or you can, but it would be foolish to separate wokeism, critical race theory, federalization of our election system, and a glide path to one-party control. You shouldn't separate them, because they're all coming out of the same playbook. And that is to make us into a statist form of government. You put the label on it that breeds dependency and weakens individual liberty. So this isn't just an election battle that we're in. This is a battle for our constitutional republic, the rule of law, and individual liberty. And so we can, it was an honor for me to listen to that young man because his analysis was spot on and is consistent with the fight that I am witnessing in Washington, D.C. around this election integrity legislation falsely labeled for the people. When you really drill down through the hundreds of pages, it is for the corrupt politicians. And that is the nature of the fight that we're in. And I would open it up to any questions about what we were able to see, on the ground, looking back. And let me just say this. We're going through an audit in Arizona. We're back on track. What I want to say is that audit is important, but you must realize that even if they find some glaring irregularities or fraud for presidential races, by constitution and tradition, we don't get a do-over. We, in fact, then have to say, we can question the legitimacy of the president, who in fact gained office through that route, but we must build to make sure that we have the defenses against that happening again in the next election. We cannot be gaslighted into believing, in my case, as a member of the Republican Party, that somehow I'm in a party of an extreme, that's in an extreme minority in the country. We control more state legislative chambers. We, in fact, closed the gap, in this past election in the House. I believe that we were well positioned to win the House. We control more county governments. The reality is that we're dead even with the Democrats in the Senate. And if everything had been on the up and up, we probably would have at least a 1 point advantage if in fact the irregularities hadn't happened in Georgia. But the question that was asked of the previous speaker, what can we do? The abolitionist Frederick Douglass said it best. Those who are whooped easiest are whooped most often. We must fight. We must push back. We must not be canceled. We cannot be deleted. We cannot be silenced. We must fight. Thanks, Dan.
So I've just got to ask you a couple foundational things. Vivek, I saw you pop on. If you want to pop in and make a comment or so, please feel free to. But Ken, I just have had so many people talk to me about the election, and you were the Secretary of State in Ohio from 1999 to 2007. Could you give me a benchmark of how you would consider the safety of Ohio's election process in 2007 when you left compared to where it was in November last year? How would you compare the two?
We're been on a pretty good glide path. Look, a couple of things that we had to continue to work on, but it takes cooperation with other states. That's cleaning up our voter rolls. We cannot let our voter rolls be corrupted. We, in fact, must make sure that there's no room for the exploitation of folks who have moved out of the state or who are dead, mysteriously voting in our elections in the present moment. So those things are, we are now, as I understand it, on the verge of protecting in Ohio with new legislation against what happened in several places in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere, where Zuckerberg's money, almost $500 million, were spent in a partisan way to skew the results. And so there's still work that we need to do in Ohio. But just as was the case of Florida, Florida, as you remember, with the hanging chads in the 2000 elections, both Florida and Ohio have been on a path. And again, my native, my neighbor and longtime buddy Bill Seitz is frequently on talking about what Ohio is doing, how Ohio is protected. Look, one area where Bill was right, and I was not as cautious as I could have been, was in absentee ballots. We moved from you having to meet one of a few excuses to get an absentee ballot to no fault absentee ballots. That's was okay, but what Bill will tell you now, we watched that go from no excuse or no fault absentee balloting from a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks to 4 weeks. And in some states, it is now 6 weeks. And anytime you, in fact, stretch out the calendar, you make the chain of custody a little bit looser for those ballots, and the system is more vulnerable. So I think Ohio, you have to show some form of voter ID. It is not mandatory that you have a photo ID. I would in fact say we should move towards that, and we shouldn't have to back up to the window to do that.
I just have one more question for you, Ken, and then we've got a bunch of questions online. And so you talked about the smell test, and you went through 5 or 6 different things that didn't smell right, and a lot of it sure didn't. And then you talked about the Supreme Court not taking any cases. So is it your sense that the Supreme Court is just from this point on into the future, they're saying you either handle it in your own state, we're not going to have anything to do with it. If you can't fix it in your state with your legislators and your own Supreme Court, we're not getting involved with elections. Is that what they're saying?
Well, let me say it this way. It would be very easy to lean into that conclusion, although I will fight that along with a lot of other constitutionalists to say that the Supreme Court, has to be able to deal with constitutional violations. Look, the Fifth Amendment was violated. Equal protection provision of the Constitution was violated when some voters were allowed to cure their ballots and others were not. That is a legitimate constitutional issue that the Supreme Court has to take a position on, and we shouldn't let up on them. They're not beyond our criticism, even though they want to feign that they are. We need to pound the table to make sure that they do their job.
Okay, let's get to the questions. Vivek, if you want to jump in, if you have anything you want to say, we'll get you in too. So Tom wants to ask you the question: did you get any indication that votes for Trump were switched to Biden?
No, I didn't. Again, my expertise really isn't in the voter machines, but I will tell you that any machine is capable of a malfunction. I know that there was a time in Ohio when the mechanics of the machine, there was a glitch. So can that happen? Yeah. The one beautiful thing about the decentralization of the system is that we must keep it that way. That way, not a entity, domestic or foreign, can't pick the lock and corrupt in a widespread way. That said, what this election proves, and I want to encourage everybody on this call, there are a couple 100,000 precinct executive jobs that are unfilled. I'm not talking about observers. I'm talking about folks who actually have a job on election day at the precinct level. We must make sure that we have eyeballs, in those positions that can in fact stress test the system. If we don't have our eyes on the process, in John 3, there's a passage where it says, those who would do evil love the darkness. We, in a very political sense, we have an obligation to be, not to put our candle under a bushel, but to put it on a candlestick and punch holes in the darkness so nobody can cheat. But it's at the precinct level. That's why we have to keep it at the precinct level, and we can't let them centralize and federalize the system and de-emphasize the subsidiary role of the precinct worker.
Vivek, do you want to jump in and make a comment?
Well, yeah, look, first I wanted to thank Ken for his kind comments, but I just think that I appreciate a lot of what he had to say. I actually think about this issue in a pretty simple-minded way, and I want to hear Ken's reaction to it, which is to the other side. I'm a big fan of engaging with the other side. What is the best argument against voter identification? In the sense that if the answer to that question, if we're lacking a basic answer to that question, and it is still a controversy, it might tell you all you need to know about the issue. And I personally think part of the answer is that in the name, just like Black Lives Matter represents a smokescreen for actually discarding the interests of Black lives by fixing up our schools or fixing up a broken system, this is the equivalent of, in the name of democracy, we've actually sacrificed the true democratic ideals of free speech and open debate and election integrity through voting identification. So I think that's what it's about. That's my answer, but I'd love to hear your perspective, Ken, on what would be the best possible case against voting ID laws, and what does that tell us about this whole debate?
Well, it's a false argument. Look, back in Jim Crow days and right after, Blacks in the South in particular, but across the country, were asked things like, how many jelly beans are in this jar? And if they couldn't give you the exact number, they couldn't register the vote. You cannot equate something as commonplace as a photo ID with how many jelly beans are in this jar. They don't have a rational, simple answer to your question. And that's the reason that Major League Baseball, that's the reason that Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola, to get in the headquarters of Coca-Cola, what do you have to show? A photo ID.
Or the airplane, yeah.
An airplane.
So let's just roll through some more things. Vivek, feel free to stay on if you want, but we've got tons of questions. Dave,
to the other questions, that's all.
Our friend Dave says, why are the progressives getting away with saying that cleaning up the voter rolls, requiring voter IDs are racist? What can be done to counteract these claims? Kind of what we just talked about, but how do you counteract those claims?
Well, you have to push back. In 2009, Ken Kukowski and I did an article for the Yale Law and Policy Review, and we talked about the other voting rights. Every voter has a right not to have his or her legally cast ballot negated by an illegal ballot. So therefore, taking steps to make sure that people who cast ballots are casting legal ballots is in fact a constitutional protection that is owed every voter. And so it's just amazing to me, as someone who worked in the United Nations as a representative of the sovereign United States of America, with about 193 at the time, other sovereign nation states, to listen to these folks talking about a borderless country. Because when they talk about a country without borders, you can understand why they talk about voters without borders. And it is just a form of logic that just won't go anywhere.
Yep. Ken, Tom wanted to ask the question. Many Republican states are tightening up their election laws like Georgia, yet Ohio's statewide leaders, all Republican, and our General Assembly controlled by Republicans, they seem really happy with the present laws. Do you agree with that?
No, I think that there's going to be some additional step taken, I would say in the next 90 days. Stand watch.
Well, I know so many people have asked me the same question, Ken. I know many people tonight are glad to hear that. So Sue Ellen asked the question, have you been following Dr. Douglas Frank, who has been on a few of our classes? He's a great speaker. Have you been following his study of the Ohio election with Mike Lindell, and any thoughts on his analysis?
I haven't been following, but I work with Steve Bannon and Mike and a number of other folks. I mean, they have focused in on the machines, and so I stay in my lane. Again, I will tell you that a system that stays simple and it's the best system. Stays simple and stays local. The reality is, at one point we were told that as we stepped up with modernizing voting machines, that we would in fact have the results across the nation in a matter of a few hours after the last polling place closed. Well, we now know that that's not the case. So I don't think there's anything wrong with encouraging people to vote on election day. It is the best verification system because at the precinct level, you have neighbors working and serving neighbors. You in fact have, you are protected against, anybody picking the lock because it's a decentralized system. So, yeah. It's an attitude thing. I don't think people would mind, keeping it simple so that you in fact elevate confidence in results. Right now, we're losing confidence in the results.
Yeah, our friend Dr. Frank backed you up 100% on that. He just put a comment across. We need to keep it at the precinct level. That's where it's at, and that's why it's, and that's where we need to say. So thank you, Dr. Frank, for that. Now, an anonymous listener said, just wants to know, what do you think about these computer voting systems? I mean, do you have any problem with the voting machines per se, Ken?
Well, again, I'm getting back to a point where, keeping it simple, keeping it decentralized, making sure that there's a paper trail for audit purposes, and a schedule that is met where there is never a lack of bipartisan eyeballs on the process.
Dick wants to ask the question, how can we turn off the during voting day reporting of who has voted? Last decade, it was done by posting lists of voters. I remember they were posted outside the polling places. This decade, it's real-time reporting to the county servers. The data is ripe for exploitation, as we saw in 2020, to create ballots for those who have not yet voted. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think if we don't clean up the voter rolls and we keep enough float in the system for exploitation, that is a problem, and so that's why I've put a real emphasis on making sure that we clean up the voter rolls. And as I understand it from various associations, Ohio is moving in the right direction, but we need collaboration to clean up and to share information across state lines to make sure that somebody is not registered to vote in 2 or 3 states, which does exist right now because the voting rolls are still corrupt.
Our friend Yvonne asked the question, to be a poll worker, do you think maybe we should consider making that a half-day job? It just seems like it's too long of a day for many people. Any thoughts on that?
I, I actually think that we need poll workers and eyeballs the whole time that the voting process is being executed. You know, what happened in Atlanta and Fulton County when Republicans were told to go home and then Democrats doubled back, and at that point you no longer had bipartisan eyes, and you had things that were caught on a video, on video that really again raises suspicion, and puts into doubt or makes confidence in the result less than desirable.
And Judy backs up what you said. I've said for a long time, vote on election day. Thank you, Judy. Dave Chartelow asked an interesting question. How does Ken anticipate redistricting in Ohio based on the 2020 census? Will it affect the Republican versus Democrat numbers in the 2022 House election? Any thoughts on that?
Well, because we had a great success in 2016, Republicans draw the line, so I doubt that the Republicans are going to hurt themselves.
Right. An anonymous attendee said, Mr. VR blamed corporation, I guess Vivek blamed corporation Silicon Valley and China. This is not possible as an organic movement. It's coordinated. Vivek should direct his thinking to those who are these people. I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe I shouldn't have asked that question. Any comment you want to make on that, Vivek?
Well, I think that the spirit of the question is that this isn't just some sort of organic grassroots movement. This is something that is coordinated. I actually think that there's an under-discussed and underappreciated role that China is playing in all of this. They really, I mean, there wouldn't be a Chinese word for white wokeness in the United States if they didn't have a deep understanding of it. And the way in which every time they're asked on the global stage, immediately their first response is Black Lives Matter or the United States is no better, kind of reveals that this is part of their grand strategy and agenda. So I think this is actually one of the greatest forms of foreign interference in American democracy. For all of the discussion about influencing elections, they're actually influencing our culture and using corporations as pawns in their game by saying that if you don't do it, you can't access the Chinese market. And if you do it, you get more goodies here in China. That's effectively how they've created corporations into these Trojan horses, which, like the Trojan horse in the Battle of Troy, is now actually infecting America from within. So I think there's definitely some wisdom to that question, but that's a big part of the woke industrial complex is actually the puppet master that sits abroad.
I mean, it really is. Let me just say that that's why you don't separate. These are not separated. Wokeism, you know, radical restructuring of our election system, moving towards a one-party dominated system. It's all out of the same playbook, and he's right. This is orchestrated. Look, I've watched on the continent of Africa. I've watched China execute their debt trap, and as a consequence, they control votes in the United Nations because there are so many African countries indebted to them, or they, through the debt trap, now control the infrastructure in those countries because those countries have defaulted to China. This is all coming out of the same playbook.
If I didn't know better, I would have thought maybe you two got together before this event and worked out a few talking points. Hey, Ken, refresh our mind. Barbara had this question. Where does somebody go to volunteer to be or become elected to be a precinct executive in Ohio?
Right now, it's both parties control it. So you go to the party of your choice.
Okay.
The Republican, in my case, I would go to a Republican Party headquarters and say that I want to be a precinct executive, and they will tell you, look, as I crisscross the country, different state parties have different attitudes. Sometimes they don't want movement conservatives as precinct executives. They want yes men and women in those positions. So, but in others, they're out actually, really recruiting, and they embrace folks who want to come in and be a precinct executive. I just go to the headquarters, the party of your choice, and tell them you want to be a precinct executive. I don't know of a state that doesn't have, hundreds of openings.
So Ken, we have to go to kind of the obligatory question from Douglas. Do you have a path to run for office again?
I have not fallen and bumped my head. No, I don't. Vivek said it best. This is a generational handoff. That's why I was so inspired by his presentation.
We'll just pass off the baton. Now, what about this Senate? And Vivek's back on. Do you have a comment about that? Vivek?
No, I was just when I was a kid, Ken was kind of a big name back in the political scene, so we knew him from back then. But we didn't have any backroom. We just met a few minutes before the program, but we're more like-minded than I thought.
Yeah, and Ken, what about this Senate seat in Ohio? I mean, are you backing anybody for that?
I'm sort of sifting through the backgrounds. Look, I want a full service conservative, someone that is principled and ready to mix it up. I don't need a fence sitter. I want somebody who is in fact going to, Ronald Reagan said it best. The status quo is Latin for the mess that we're in. And I want somebody that's going to mix it up.
And what was that comment? What was that quote? I tried to jot it down on my pad from Frederick Douglass. Those who are
whooped easiest or whooped most often.
I think we all need to remember that. And we also need to remember Vivek's comments about speaking out. Vivek, any final words you want to pass along tonight?
Yeah, well, look, I think that theme that Ken just hit at the end there, I think is one that the conservative movement ought to remember today, is that it's what Abraham Lincoln said: the dogmas of a quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. And we're going to have to rethink the solutions of 1980 and not retrofit them to the problems of 2021, but think about the problems of 2021 from the ground up and come up with creative solutions that actually meet the moment today. And I think that discussions like this are going to be the forums where there's fertile ground where those ideas will come out of. So I'm glad you're doing this. I'm really grateful to Ken for his comments too. I learned a lot, and I was really grateful that you guys were kind enough to have me.
Thank you, Vivek. Ken, any final words you want to share?
Well, we'll just keep it flowing. The great Satchel Paige. Look, I had a great uncle. His name was D.R. Hubbard, Walnut Hills graduate. He was the first Black American to win an Olympic gold medal in track and field in an individual event. In 1924, he set the world record in the long jump. He was scheduled that year to compete against Eric Liddell in the 100 and the high hurdles. But when he got to Paris, he was told that the high hurdles and the 100 were white-only events, and so he couldn't compete. But he came back and he told my mom's generation that he was blessed because he had gotten to witness Eric Liddell's fidelity to his faith. And that's become a watchword. And so fidelity to what America stands for, and that is, individual liberty, the sanctity of the family, and a respect. And again, right across the city at Hebrew Union College, one of Martin Luther King's good buddies, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, used to say, respect discovers the dignity in others. And that is something that Martin Luther King lived by. And he, in fact, said, we have a choice. In the 60s, early 60s, King said, we have a choice: community or chaos. And I say, that's the challenge that we have. How do we build community out of e pluribus unum, from the many one, around the value of liberty and the restraint on government that is a threat to that liberty?
Ken Blackwell, you've given us a lot to think about tonight. So thank you so much for joining Empower You. Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you for joining Empower You. We appreciate it, gentlemen. So tonight we have kind of a lingering Empowered Citizen Award I'm going to present tonight that I want to share with you. This one goes back a few weeks to around March Madness when I was going to present it. We had a little technical issue and I couldn't present it early, but it's an important one. I just wanted to get this in. So, hey, watch this.
Yeah, but the one thing I took out of that piece was, man, I think most white people and black people are great people. I really believe that in my heart. But I think our system is set up where our politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are designed to make us not like each other so they can keep their grasp of money and power. They divide and conquer. I truly believe in my heart most white people and black people are awesome people, but we're so stupid following our politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. And their only job is, hey, let's make these people not like each other. We don't live in their neighborhoods. We're all got money. Let's make the whites and blacks not like each other. Let's make rich people and poor people not like each other. Let's scramble the middle class. I truly believe that in my heart.
So thank you to Sir Charles Barkley for that. You're such a treasure. Who is Charles Barkley, for those of you who don't know? He's an American former professional basketball player and an analyst for pro and college basketball. He came out of Auburn University. He's an 11-time member of the All-NBA team, 1993 NBA Most Valuable Player. He was one of the NBA's 50 greatest players. He's written several books and shown an interest in politics. Charles Barkley is a diamond in the rough in these days when all we hear about is systemic racism, implicit bias, and he sure has a lot of common sense. So tonight, Charles Barkley, we want to thank you for being an empowered citizen. So tonight, we had so many people sign up for the class. Thank you so much. And my guess is, if I had to guess, that many of you were just so thrilled that this would be the last time you would have to hear from me for a while, because this was supposed to be our last class. So sorry, you've got to go through one more class next Tuesday night. It's an important class on critical race theory. And so sorry about that. So who's sorry now out there? But it was great having you tonight. Great having our guests, Ken Blackwell, Vivek Ramaswamy, and their important words. So I just encourage you to go out tonight, be thankful for your many blessings, and empower you.